Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's your boy, Jack Slack, rediscoverer of the fighting thong, and this is the Fights Gone By podcast, episode 22. Before we get started, I would recommend that everyone go to the YouTube channel and check out the most recent study there. It's called The Tight Footwork and Saggy Buns of Gentleman Jim. And it's some technical analysis on Gentleman Jim Corbett, from the most recent history episode, which, if you are a Patreon boy, you can go and watch now. 50-minute history lecture, basically. But I thought I'd show the little technical bit to the people of YouTube, because that stuff's always fun. And because Gentleman Jim moves like Dominic Cruz but wears a thong. It's really weird. In the late 19th century, when women weren't allowed to show too much ankle, Jim Corbett's out there in a thong. It's really strange. Anyway, we've got a little bit to talk about this week in terms of fights. The only really interesting one coming up is Joe Lauzon versus Marcin Held. Other than that, I mean, there's that BJ Penn versus Yair Rodriguez match. And then there's a few names in sort of fights with non-names. So a bit weird. But not a very good card, obviously. I don't think Bellator's got anything going down until Chael versus Tito. And Ryzen won't be doing anything until mid-year or something like that. And World Series of Fighting is probably bankrupt. Possibly, maybe. So what news do we have to talk about this week? Holly Holm was rumoured injured and then wasn't. You know, it was one of those rumour things where an insider says it and actually got it from a direct message from someone who was pretending to know what they were talking about. I mean, we could get into journalism, ethics and all that stuff, but, you know, wait for Ariel Helwani or Kareem Zidane or someone who we actually know checks with multiple people. And I'm saying this as someone who isn't a journalist, but, you know, I would much rather listen to people who are going to check with two people first before they do the room. And checking with two people, not typically a lot to ask for, you know, someone to report something. So Holly Holm's healthy, and that hotly anticipated fight with Germaine de Randamie is going ahead. And Bellator just announced that they are getting their Bellator women's featherweight title going. Marlis Kunin versus, I think it's Julia Budd. Can't remember. So soon we'll have two world titles in a division with about 6 people total. Yeah. And you know, it's not me ragging on the competitors, because obviously you know that I love Holly Holm. And Marlis Kunin is my waifu. Best dressed woman in MMA. Always turns up in something nice. Like a turtleneck or something, you know, avant-garde. But there is no one in that division, so, you know, I'm not optimistic about its future. It's more a fallback for people who are having trouble at bantamweight. The other news of the week, Tony Ferguson versus Khabib is being announced again, I think, but, you know, I've given up hope on that fight. You know, they've scheduled it twice, and it's fallen through twice. But the stupidest thing is that Khabib's manager, Ali Abdul, whatever his name is, bit of a shady guy, keeps leaving himself logged in on the wrong account when he's commenting on stuff. Which is why it's never worth being invested in, like, Twitter drama of athletes. If they are of any importance, they'll have hired someone to look after their Twitter. But enough about that. The reason you're really here is to hear me shoot on Meryl Streep. Yep, Meryl Streep made a speech at the Golden Globes. I mean, if you saw any of the Golden Globes, it was the usual array of autofellatio. It was just people jerking themselves off to the idea of how important they are. And that's the same with every single one of these. Except Emma Stone. I've got a ton of time for Emma Stone. She's all right. But most of it was just, oh, how good we all are. Tom Hiddleston's speech was a disaster. And Meryl Streep got up and she said, you know, she did do a good job for someone who's not been on stage since like 2005. She did a great job of remembering where all the important people there came from and where they grew up. And the whole speech was like a pro-diversity thing. And then she was reaching her climax, and she said that if you kicked out all the outsiders in Hollywood, all you'll be left with is football, I'm assuming American football, and mixed martial arts, which are not the arts. And everyone went wild. And I sat at my computer going, good God, what am I going to write about this week? This weekend's event is jank. Said to myself, oh ho ho, And to be honest, I've been looking for a way to approach mixed martial arts as an art form, or as an art, rather. For a long time, I've been wanting to write an article about that, and this one just spurred me into action. So I wrote an article called MMA as an Art, a polite response to Meryl Streep. And it's probably one of my most shared articles ever, just thousands and thousands of people on Facebook sharing it. And wonderful responses from all the people on my Facebook feed. And then I checked the shares and on Fightland's page, and I remembered why I love my readership so much, because, oh God, just everywhere else. This was one of my first encounters with that portion of the internet who makes everything about race or Trump or Hillary or, all that shit. Just astonishing. Someone went into the article, posted a long rant about art is subjective. Oh, subjective like when Donald Trump says grab them by the pussy. Subjective like when Donald Trump mocks a disabled reporter. And I'm just like, who the fuck said anything about Donald Trump? I used a tiny bit of Meryl Streep's speech as a jumping off point to talk about something, knowing that, that'd get the people in. But I was using it as a chance to show, if you're writing, there are only two points. One is to inform and the other is to entertain. Anything other than those two and you're failing as a writer, basically. And I thought I had a nice chance to inform people who wouldn't otherwise see anything about MMA, probably, and to entertain people who already knew the stuff that I write. So I did. I wrote some snarky jokes and put in some musings on what art is. And to me, honestly, mixed martial arts and fighting are arts. They produce moments that film has... I pointed this out in the article. Rocky and Raging Bull won Oscars for attempting to portray the kind of moments that happen organically in professional fighting. And we could talk about all the science and the many approaches to doing anything in the cage, and art as a tool of self-expression and all that stuff. But it was just bizarre to see people take this and somehow turn it into a racial issue or an issue about whatever they really wanted to talk about. Dear. Fightland's Facebook feed is just full of, I had no idea Fightland was a racist page. And I'm like, just read the article, bitch. Not a single mention of any kind of race or... Actually, to be honest, I did mention race, because the idea that if you took all the outsiders or foreigners out of the nation, we'd be left with just MMA and American football is very strange, because, MMA is one of the most diverse sports going. One of the champions is a Pole, another one's an Englishman, another one's an Irishman. It's like the start of a bad joke. 3 African Americans, 2 Brazilians, 1 Hawaiian. That's a cast more diverse than the new attempts at Star Wars. And I looked through some of the comments, and some of them are amazing. Like, people who've clearly been to university for either gender studies or some nonsense degree, but writing, it's very easy to find quotes from artists to back up your point. And then their whole point was that I didn't use artists that they liked. I was like, what the fuck kind of argument is that? You want me to not quote artists, but only quote artists you like? Okay. Quoting Georgia O'Keeffe, that's a bit on the nose. I'd rather, him talk about a postmodern blah, blah, blah. And I was like, shut the fuck up. But I did find my favourite internet comment this week. There is a rare breed of martial artist out there, and we thought they were dying out, but I found one, and it made me really chuckle. This chap comments, right, a dramatic reading of my favourite internet comment ever. It is called martial arts for a reason. There is an art to it. However, there aren't any MMA katas and forms. I do have an issue with MMA. I have been in many dojos in my time. I have been privy to inter-dojo competitions. I have watched hulks of men get their asses handed to them by skinny little martial artists. Then I watch MMA and read their stats. They studied X, Y, Z martial art, yet none of them execute high-level techniques that would win them the day easily. Takedowns, throws, maneuvers specifically designed to get around, roundhouse kicks or push kicks, or to break through a guard. There is a Japanese term for when you predict the other fighter's move, I see none of that. Hell, I watched Jason David Frank in many a video display such takedowns and high-level martial arts, yet when I watch his MMA fights, I see none of it. It is like a brawl that doesn't even look like straight-up fights I have seen in real life. Are there rules and regulations that stop certain maneuvers? I understand not killing people, but why don't more martial arts masters enter and wipe the floor with these contestants? Oh, that's good. Oh, we didn't think they existed anymore, but they do. Yeah, this guy thinks that the Green Ranger is a decent representation of mixed martial arts. And when he says that he's seen Jason David Frank display many takedowns and high-level martial arts in videos and then not in MMA fights, does he mean in the Power Rangers? Just a truly bizarre comment. But part of me really likes that there are people out there that still believe that stuff, that there are masters in dojos who just don't enter because they don't want to. But if they did, they'd win, just so you know. So that was my fun this week, dealing with the angry part of the internet. And just the bizarre part of the internet. But, you know, Meryl Streep is represented by CAA, so she's clearly just bringing up mixed martial arts to rub it in the face of WME, if you're into that sort of conspiracy. But I think it's important to note that when people get high and mighty or, you know, lofty delusions of grandeur over their position as artists when they're actors or something similar, Meryl Streep isn't turning down roles in shit like It's Complicated and Into the Woods, which you would have a hard time arguing were, you know, lofty artistic endeavours. They were to make easy money very quickly. Basically, she's in the same position that Helen Mirren is now, where they've cornered out the old lady market, similar to Warwick Davies. If you don't know who Warwick Davies is, he is every short character in Harry Potter. Because he has an acting agency for short actors, and any of the meaty roles that come up, he takes them himself. But ultimately, you know, it was all bollocks. Didn't really need talking about, but I thought, easy article, nice way to get some people who don't normally think about mixed martial arts to read some stuff about mixed martial arts. And in that sense, it worked. Scott Coker wrote an interesting reply to Meryl Streep. Not a bad letter, to be honest. I did have pangs of wanting to retweet this and say, can confirm Scott Coker will pay people regardless of race, sex, age, skill, or even record. But I'm trying to be nicer to Coker because he's trying. He's trying. You know, he's just trying to make his promotion work, even if he is trying to, you know, running the risk of getting people killed at the same time. I'm actually pretty excited about Tito versus Chael. If you haven't seen the new promotional video for that, it's Chael Sonnen talking to camera for 4 minutes, which is always enjoyable. But he talks about beating Tito Ortiz in wrestling in college. And Tito Ortiz was... Chael went up in weight to beat Tito Ortiz on his birthday, which was pretty cool. And if you see the match, he is just relentless. Goes straight after a leg, comes up, throws him with a head and arm. Beautiful stuff, and really represents Chael Sonnen in a good light. But basically in this interview, Chael talks about how his father was getting into MMA, and they watched Tito drop out of college or whatever it was and go to the UFC, become the champion. And then Chael, after his successful wrestling career, decided to go into MMA. And he said something about like his last... The one promise he never kept was that he told his dad he'd beat Tito Ortiz and become the champion of the UFC. And he gets choked up saying it. And such is the charisma of Chael Sonnen that he could well just be making this up. But it got me. And I'm now well invested in that fight. You should go watch it if you haven't. It was really good. Right. It's a really slow week regarding upcoming fights. So what we're going to do is going to go to the question thread on Facebook and answer some rapid fire questions. Jeremy asks, what's BJ's path to victory, assuming he isn't liver kicked into retirement? I'll talk about that whole fight in a second, so we'll save that for the last segment. Also, is anyone on the card one of your boys? BJ Penn can't be because he was a champion. Joe Lozon would be a boy, but I don't think he needs to be a boy because he is so popular. But he is a solid dude if you interact with him. Are there any parallels with the early days of the UFC to where the women's divisions are at now? E.g. the grapplers dominating Hoyce Hughes equals Esparza Rousey, then the strikers Rutten Vitor Liddell equals Joanna Holm Nunes. Nunes? Whatever. Yeah, I mean, I've likened Joanna to Chuck Liddell because she does a lot of pure sprawling and brawling. She's not someone who really fights through all areas of the fight in the, you know, as a Frankie Edgar or someone like that would. She is someone who wants to fight in her area, and then the whole other part of her game is about getting up or staying off the mat. Yeah, I think it's safe to say that the women's divisions are basically considerably behind the men's divisions. But it's interesting because, you know, they are training with people who are in the men's game and at the high level. So, you know, it'll come along quickly. I think it's just, to be honest, most of it is that they haven't been paid properly to do this for very long. I think you're going to see some rapid improvement in those divisions over time. But equally, I think people, much like men's MMA, people are jumping on the, oh my God, how will anyone beat this bandwagon too early? Like I said last week when someone asked me who the hell can beat Amanda Nunes, watch her last, 7-8 fights. She's had real trouble and lost some. So, need to keep everything in perspective. It's coming along, and it will just be a normal sport like the men's. Anyone can lose at any time. It's not going to be a case of, oh my God, how do you beat this tactic? Best defensive MMA BJJ in MMA history. I don't know. But best defensive BJJ got to be Ryan Gracie. Ryron. Whichever one shelled up underneath Andre Galvao, getting knee on belly for 20 minutes, and then was like, well, my jiu-jitsu works in street fights because he couldn't submit with the holds that we do in jiu-jitsu. Oh dear, that was just a fucking mess. I mean, it was an impressive feat, but it was one of those Gracie moral victories where the logic didn't make any sense. And then they had to go at Eddie Bravo's lockdown for not being a viable defense on the street, even though the lockdown is a nice clinching guard where you probably won't be hit as much, and underside of knee on belly is not a good place to be if you're going to get punched. What, in your opinion, are the best dirty tricks for a street fight outside of sucker punch, groin kicks, and eye pokes? Fucking love questions about dirty fighting. Disclaimer, don't do any of this or you're a dickhead. I got someone, I remember, must have been 2013, 2014, no, probably earlier. In my first year of writing, I was like, I'm astonished how people are eating this up. It's great. People care about the technical aspects of MMA. And someone sent me this message being like, oh, thanks so much. You have really helped me in my street fights. And I was like, fuck off, mate. That's just the worst thing you could possibly tell me. Yeah, don't get into street fights. You're a dickhead if you do. On the other hand, it is always hilarious fun to have a conversation with a doorman or, bouncers and people like that. I knew a guy who he'd wear a big jacket, and in the lapels he'd put some of his wife's pins from sewing. Because anytime someone wants to, get in your face and intimidate you, they'll grab you by the lapels. And as soon as they do, these needles go right into their fingers. Oh, that's a really good trick. I mean, it takes some preparation. You need to be working in an environment where people are probably going to grab you and try and intimidate you. But it is a neat little trick that... It reminds me of Kid McCoy, actually. Kid McCoy, light heavyweight boxer, used to go... Supposedly... He is the origin of the phrase, the real McCoy. And of course, there's 18 different origin stories for that phrase, but a couple of them involve Kid McCoy. He used to travel around bars, and he'd say that he was Kid McCoy, and people wouldn't believe him. And then when they were waking up from the knockout later, they'd say, oh, he was the real McCoy. And there's a story about McCoy fighting an islander somewhere, and the guy wants to fight him on the beach. And so McCoy goes to where they want to meet up, and he arrives early, and he sprinkles some thumbtacks in the sand where he wants to fight the guy. So as soon as he drags him over into that part, the guy treads in him, and McCoy knocks him out. Probably one of those apocryphal stories, but I just like that level of cheating. There's a fucking amazing book called Outlaw Killer Punches by Champ Thomas. Very, very hard to get. My copy cost me loads, and it's in really shabby condition. But in that, he details the act of getting resin on your hands from the ring mat on your gloves and pushing it into the opponent's eyes. I mean, if you've seen any time a boxer gets knocked down, they wipe off their gloves on the refs. The ref wipes the gloves off on his shirt. But in the old days, they used to put resin into the ring mat a lot more, and you could get it on your gloves. And if the referee wasn't on the ball, you could convince him that he'd wiped your gloves clean, and you could still grind this resin into the opponent's eyes. Not really a street fight trick, sorry about that. But throwing sand in people's eyes, bit of pocket sand. Everyone needs pocket sand. A couple of old kata from the Okinawan tradition start with a kneeling movement, and in the modern era that's become, I kneel down to block his kick like this. And you're like, why would you kneel down if he's kicking at you? And then I was reading something about Hohen Soken, who was like a farmer who learned from one of the Matsumuras, can't remember what, but he was a guy who, when they were first giving out the dan grades, when the Okinawan karate people got together and decided to actually have some belts, they gave him like a ninth dan or an eighth dan, and nobody even knew who he was. He was just this like farmer who was amazing at karate. But he often said that the kneeling down in forms was to pick up dirt, and then you come up and throw it in the opponent's face. I mean, it's a decent move because it does exactly the same thing that a jab does most of the time. A jab is for either closing the eyes by hitting them or obscuring the vision by punching in front of the face. If you can throw something in their eyes from a distance and run in and hit them, you're just as well. I've never heard an actual account of someone pulling off that old pull the jacket down over their biceps and then punch them in the face move, but I always love when that appears in old books. I'm just like, I really want to try that on someone wearing a coat. But most people wear their coats unbuttoned or unzipped nowadays, so especially if you're a doorman and people are coming in, their jackets are undone anyway, so there's not really anything to hold their arms down. If you watch any sort of like doorman training or anything like that, you'll be really surprised at how much of the stuff links in with inside control in wrestling, and what I playfully term the Jack Johnson clinch. In fact, we'll be talking all about this in the next history episode. Sign up to the Patreon, motherfuckers. But Jack Johnson, he used to control guys by cupping over their biceps on the inside. And that all links in also with Jeff Thompson's idea of the fence. If you can control the inside lines on the biceps, as soon as the guy tries to bring a hand up to swing at your head, you can just stuff it into the bicep, and then you're controlling the inside line, so you can hit him in the chin on the other side with your right hand. Inside control, really important for doormen, and also, in wrestling, really important. Actually, I was watching an amazing hour of John Smith, the legendary wrestler, talking about tie-ups on the feet and controlling them. And what is really interesting about Smith is that, whenever I've been doing any wrestling with, within like a grappling or MMA context, inside control is what you're normally taught. And especially if you've got some Muay Thai experience, you love controlling the neck and inside the arms so that they can't elbow you. But Smith is really interesting because he really liked the opponent to go for head control, and then he'd hold their elbows. And he said, he thought that it was impossible for them to shoot from there. Because if you can't get your elbow back, you can't drop onto the leg, and it's really interesting. Like go watch that, because John Smith and his instructionals are all amazing too. But we're getting off topic now. Inside control, really important for bouncers and people like that. You'd be surprised how many effectively arm drags are like a bouncer's favorite. Most of them like the thing where you're doing the inside control. You've got the hands loosely on their shoulders, and you push one shoulder and pull the other and turn them around so that you've got their back. And, against inebriated or untrained people, that can work quite well. In fact, if you're interested in self-defense stuff, and I think everyone should probably look at the work of Jeff Thompson, it's really... it's like the actual content of it could fill up like 10 pages maybe, and he has written hundreds of books, but that's what you want from something for the street, or when you're in a situation that is terrifying you. You don't want to have to be like, if I can just bait the jab and set up my cross counter. When you're sparring or if you're a fighter or something like that, you get time to work out what you're going to do and build the tells, draw things out. If you're actually in a situation that's escalating on the street, fucking love the street, that's you don't want to be dealing with too much information. But the fence is really interesting because it is basically hands open and up, so that you are actually in a guard, but you're not like, put them up, I'm clearly going to fight you. And if you can keep a hand on them, just in their chest, fingertips, and they're very lightly controlling and obstructing the angles which they're going to try and hit through or swing through. Another interesting one, I was reading Battling Nelson's autobiography, The Life and Fights of Battling Nelson. He was called the Durable Dane, and he was famous for knocking out Joe Gans, I think it was 3 times, something like that, yeah, which is incredible. But won't talk too much about his signature punch, because I was reading about that the other day and I was like, that sounds really interesting. It's called the half scissor left hook, and it's basically like a single knuckle strike. And he said that it changed him from being like an all-right fighter to a world-class fighter, and it's a punch that takes like 6 inches. But he said he got the idea from Joe Chewinski, another one we're going to be talking about in the next history episode. Joe Chewinski, apparently, like when they were in the clinch, he'd put his fingertips on the guy's chest, like by the nipple, as if to talk to him and say, "Come on now, let's break this clinch." And as soon as the guy opened his mouth to talk, Chewinski would slam the heel of that same palm, like 3 or 4 inches movement, but he'd slam it into their liver, and he could wind them and then open up with the right hand. Something I've always personally trained from like that inside control defense sort of stuff is controlling the sleeves on both biceps, and this is a technique that Rafael Agaev does all the time in like the World Karate Point Fighting Championships or whatever it is. And then you do, I think it's a Sasai Surikomi Ashi, but basically you block the lead leg with your foot on their shin, and you just try and pull them past it by stepping off line and dragging. And really useful one if there's a pavement there for them to fall on, and you can then kick them in the head afterwards. Look up Rafael Agaev to check out some more of that. I think I wrote something about him at some point. Actually, yeah, look up an article called Lyoto Machida and the Double-Edged Sword of Competition Karate. And the throws in there. It's a lovely one. And he does all sorts of other things, from controlling the sleeves on the biceps there too. Which is interesting because it's obviously not a position you use in judo, but it is a controlling position you use in wrestling, but you can lock it in because you're gripping the sleeves. And the clothing is always a really interesting consideration when you talk about street stuff. And it's why the Gracies still justify training gi chokes and stuff. When we all know it's really just for fun. You know, gi chokes are cool. You're not really going to choke anyone out on their jacket, probably. Sorry, I got really into answering that question. I just there are so many neat little tricks that I've learned from people who've been doormen or bouncers or prison guards or things like that over the years. But that is all linked into like the Champ Thomas thing, the carnival boxer or the carnival wrestler. You're not fighting top level guys. You don't have to whip yourself into shape in like a 3-month camp. But if you are taking on a live, even inexperienced opponent every night or several, you find tricks to get around it without getting yourself into trouble, into long slogs. And bouncers and people like that are very interesting because they don't want to have a fight with you. They don't want a proper fight with you. They want to get home safe to their wife and kids or whatever. So they find ways to cut corners, and that is how martial arts technique in any martial art came to be. It's ways of cutting corners and making the most of what you've got while trying to deny them any opportunity to use what they've got. Sorry, that was from Stuart. I forgot to say. Vincent asks, can a pressure fighter pressure if he can't win exchanges? And Reese says, see Damian Meyer. Yeah, I mean, pressure is the act of making people work. If you can take 1,000 punches to the head, you're going to get brain damage, but you can tire the guy out on your own head. The pressure that Nate Diaz was bringing in the second fight with Conor McGregor puts up his bull guard, head down, walks straight forward, takes a load of blows, gets to the inside, starts throwing from there. And that was exhausting McGregor because he was trying to circle out and run away, but he couldn't land anything good. And then if he stood still too long, the other guy would start working his body. So you can fight a very ugly fight and still win it on pressure. If you could implement one change to the sport of MMA that would see a major benefit to fighters today, what would that be and why? I mean, if we went outside the cage, I'd say promotion has to release their financials. Then we'd know, that's the old one in MMA journalism. What's the split? Everyone wants to know what the split is. Because even now, Bjorn Rebney is saying, like, oh, the fighter's always got 50% of the revenue when I was in charge of Bellator. And there's no way that he's proved that. Inside the cage, I'd get those gloves that fucking cut people's hands. The fingers in the eyes is the biggest pain in the arse in modern MMA for me. Especially because guys realise that they can get away with it because it always looks like an accident, or is at least always treated like an accident. John Jones and people like that know that they're going to poke the guy in the eye. It's that, oh, I'll just leave this here and he'll run onto it. I think it was Pride had the gloves that cupped the hands. Of course we can't tape all the hands together in fists because you need them open to grapple, but I don't see the problem with having the fighter have to try to open his hand and grapple. Just by having it cupped a little bit by the glove. And the UFC was talking about finding gloves that dealt with this problem in 2009 or something like that, and then they just shut up about it. Oh, quality question here. James says, aliens invade Earth. They say send your 5 best warriors from any time period to face us in hand-to-hand combat, or we'll boil your brains into soup. Who do you send and why? Edit, there's no extraterrestrial USADA, so TRT abuse is just gravy. No, I'm not going to go with people like John Jones and Vitor Belfort and people like that. I am going to go with a believer, George St. Pierre, maybe the Great Gamma, Frank Gotch. We're going out a full team of wrestlers, except the last one I think will have someone like Babe Ruth, or maybe just me with a baseball bat. And what will happen is the Great Gamma and John Smith or whoever and George St. Pierre, they'll tackle the aliens to the ground, and they'll say, Jacques, eat him with the bat, and I'll twat him in the head with the bat. I think that's a solid plan for Earth Defense Force. Of course, you haven't actually mentioned if the aliens are humanoid or whatever. I was assuming either greys, and then I had a bad thought, and I was like, what if they were like the 9-foot tall ones from that episode of The Twilight Zone? To Serve Man? That's such a good episode. Go watch that on YouTube now. Is the first eye poke of 2017 going to be a deducted point? No! Never. The referees will never deduct a point for the first eye poke. Unless it's really weird. And then I bet they get bollocked for it. I bet the fans just go mental about how it was probably an accident and he should have got the benefit of the doubt on the first one. Chimpy says, would you like to talk a bit about what it takes to go from a person with fighting potential to a world champion? There's a great movie called Whiplash, which talks about the extremes an individual can go to reach the elite levels of sport or art, as is in the case of the movie. It also talks about the relationship between the individual and the coach or teacher. I think finding the right teacher is a really important thing. I think, a huge degree of this is luck. You could grow up somewhere with no MMA gyms at all and have all the potential in the world and never discover it. But surround yourself with people you respect and admire. Try to stay away from the toxic douchebags. Chris Hauser, Can't remember his name. Amazing old jiu-jitsu guy. He did a great speech where he said environment is stronger than will, and he said if you surround yourself with people with healthy habits every day, that's a lot stronger than if you were going to some gym full of morons who just want to punch the shit out of each other, and you were saying, okay, I'll look after my brain and my nutrition and all that sort of shit. There are guys who have whipped themselves into elite shape on their own and can do much of their own training by themselves, but being around the right people, or at least healthy people, is, and I don't just mean physically healthy, I mean mentally healthy. Nobody wants to train with Hector Lombard, You don't want to train with someone like that. You want someone who'll push you, but who'll respect your limits and push those limits, but not like just taking a whooping on day one is just the worst. And when you talk about someone staying in their own area rather than going abroad to find a world-class gym, I always think of Fedor, for a start, training in Storioskal, and his career probably did suffer at the later stages by not being willing to leave his hometown. He used to go to I think it was St. Petersburg or Moscow, wherever, to train, and eventually he was also going down to Holland to train with Ernesto Hoost and Tyrone Spong and people. But the later in his career it got, the more he just stayed at home. But Conor McGregor is in a gym full of guys who are not on the same level as him, but he still gets a huge amount from training with them. And they get a tremendous amount from training with him, I'm sure. Environment and coach are probably a lot more important than anything you can will yourself to do on your own. In the sense that even if you have the willpower and the skill and the drive to be the best in the world, if you're with a bad coach, that's going to have more impact on you than if you had no coach, almost. Who are some of the best switch hitters in kickboxing? Andy Risti. Has he come back yet? He's taken a break since that Robin van Roosmalen fight. He's just incredible, and I think Glory really misused him because they were burying him on undercards for a while, and he reliably knocks out the best fighters in the world. Yeah, really strange that he's disappeared. And his teacher, Lucian Carbin, I think I've only ever seen one fight of him, and it's a really weird one where he's wearing a full tracksuit and boxing gloves. But he has a really interesting style that's all about switch hitting, and that's why all his fighters are like that. Andrew says, is there any historical evidence of karate being used to fend off samurai, or is it my Shodan just making stuff up? This is a really interesting topic, actually. I did want to do a history episode on Okinawa in general. Okinawa is interesting because it was the weaponless kingdom. They banned weapons there. And some ambassador from Napoleon wrote a thing to Napoleon about this, and Napoleon was apparently really surprised. But the weapons ban was not by the samurai. That was by one of the Okinawan kings decided that there was so much infighting going on that it would be easier if there was just a ban on owning weapons. And this is the feudal days, when as a landowner, you would have peasants working on your land, and then if there was a war, they'd be expected to rise, to work for you as your makeshift army. So most landowners in feudal societies had to own the weapons to give to the people to fight for them. So that's why weapon ownership was banned. It wasn't like you can't own a sword, because a lot of the aristocrats did train swordsmanship and things like that. But certainly there were no weapons at court and things like that. And there's all sorts of stories about guys training to fight with fans and shit. But supposedly a lot of Kabudo is a martial art out of Okinawa, and it's basically farm implements that have been turned into weapons. So if you see things like tonfa, which became the nightstick, they are apparently the handle from an old stone grinder. Nunchucks are a little bit weirder because there's I've read things about them coming from both Korea and China. I'm not entirely sure where they come from, but I had heard that they started out as a rice flail. I think it's called an eku, an oar from a boat. There's kata for eku, which you dig the eku into the ground and use the side of the oar to throw sand up at the opponent. Coming back to what we talked about earlier. The thing about the samurai occupation of Okinawa, Okinawa was for a long time in like a Japanese colony, basically, owned by, it had its own king, but they didn't really mean anything. But the thing about the whole samurai stuff is that no one was barehanded fighting samurai. That would be daft. But there is a story about Chatan Yara, who was a aristocrat. I think he owned his own little island or something like that, because Okinawa is the largest island on the Ryukyus. There are hundreds of them, and they're all different. There's volcanic ones and all sorts. But apparently Chatan Yara had his own island, and one day he was allegedly there was a samurai attempting to rape a woman, and he grabbed the oar from a boat and brained the samurai, and that became a huge deal. That was what he was known for. So, I mean, even if that story is untrue, the fact that he became known for it suggests that it was very unusual for anyone to be using any sort of martial art to fight a samurai. I keep saying samurai, this will be a soldier of some kind of the Japanese. But no, the idea of punching into the weak points of the armor and stuff like that, probably bollocks. Jonathan asks, do you use martial arts as a form of therapy? I know it's helped me keep sane over the years of struggles with mental health issues. Yeah, I'm a big believer in not just martial arts, but activity. Hemingway said that he knew nothing that couldn't be cured with work. And I think knuckling down is a great way to deal with stuff, burying yourself in your work. And I also think that physical activity is probably... I mean, they teach PE in schools and things like that, physical education or whatever it's called in the US, but I think it should be a much greater focus of our lives just to stay active. Certainly martial arts for me, as someone who isn't like a competitive athlete or anything like that, martial arts for me has always just been a way to feel like I'm improving. It's been like a combination of mental and physical exercise, which is really important. And it's an exercise that I can do that I don't hate, because I fucking hate cardio so much. In fact, later on when I started actually doing cardio and focusing on my gas tank, it was because I wanted to be able to do the things I love for longer. There's nothing worse than getting tired while you're doing something you enjoy. Ask your wife about that one. Yeah, I mean, I'll never... this is why I'll never shit on things like Tai Chi and Aikido and things like that. I think whatever you can do, you should be doing. I'll only ever shit on stuff when people say things are amazing fighting moves that clearly aren't. And while I believe that forms are a way of typically they were a way of teaching someone moves without telling them what they did. Because there's a huge history of distrust in martial arts, and then after 3 years you'd show them what one of the moves meant or something like that. So to me, forms have always been like a little history book, a study, something you could go through and go, oh, maybe that's interesting. Not something that you'll get better by actually practicing. But if people want to practice forms and that's all they can do at their health or age or whatever, I'm never going to shit on that. And for the younger people and even people who aren't particularly competitive, I mean, I've never really enjoyed competitions. They just stress me out. But the act of being in not douchebaggy competition, but the act of struggling against another person every day or every other day or whatever, it really puts everything in perspective for you, and it also makes you feel really good. Even if you get your ass kicked, the moments when you're having success, you'll go home glowing about that one time you almost sweeped the brown belt or black belt. Forget the 8 or 9 times that they tapped you in a 6-minute or 7-minute roll or whatever. It's those little steps that you make, and they just make you feel on top of the world, no matter what's going on in your life. And then, of course, there's all the endorphins and things that actually exercising releases, but that's just a common thing of any exercise. But the main thing for me is that martial arts is exercise that I actually enjoy. That's a crux of it for me, and I'm sure that's the way for many other people too. But you hear all sorts of wonderful stories about people with PTSD and things like that doing martial arts, and it's not going to cure you of anything, but you'll certainly feel benefits from it, and maybe that's 30 minutes out of the day that you're not thinking about something else, or that's 30 minutes at work when you're daydreaming about martial arts and you're not thinking about something you're sad about. Christ, we're getting over time here. Let's do the quick talk about the weekend's fight. Don't really care too much about it, probably. It's just BJ Penn coming back, and his last fight was, 3 years ago? Last Frankie Edgar fight. And really what I took away from it was him trying to change too much too late. He'd been working with Yes Men in Hawaii for forever, and he went to Novo now, and came in looking like a weird Henan Barao Bizarro knockoff. Had this upright stance, square on, looking like he wanted to try and check kicks, but failed to check every kick that came. He was upright, so every time he was punching down, and Frankie Edgar's right hand would hit him over the top. Honestly, I feel like the best chance for BJ Penn in this fight is to crowd Yair Rodriguez, because Yair Rodriguez has those amazing spins and shit, but he doesn't set him up, and his boxing is really not great. He'll lean way forward at the waist and look down, and just sort of front crawl motion towards people. And he does get caught on the fence quite a bit. The unfortunate thing is that BJ Penn has never been that great at bringing the pressure. What he does is he takes up his boxing stance and he's like, come to me and I'll counterpunch you. And if people are like, no, then it doesn't really work that well. But Penn had always had good wrestling. He surprised John Fitch with it, of all people. He was very good at setting up his shots. He used to do a left hook into a level change, and that worked really well. He could really convince guys with that. And of course, he's like the best guard passer that you'll ever see in MMA. Like 15 years ago, he was passing guys guards in ways that people aren't passing guys guards now. It's just insane. If you watch that fight with Jens Pulver, it literally was 15 years ago. And he's doing these amazing passes that you won't ever see. Now, the thing about Yair Rodriguez is some people loved that fight with Alex Caceres. I loved it for about 2 rounds, and then I realized, oh shit, he's not actually setting anything up. It's just going to be as long as he can do this. And he did do it for 25 minutes at altitude in Salt Lake City, which is impressive. But let's contrast one specific setup between him and Lando Venata, the groovy one. That Mac Dacey knockout. Side kick into the lead leg, wheel kick. And you can see him do this against Alex Caceres. Rodriguez, this is. Rodriguez, every time he goes for that low-line side kick, he picks his knee up to his chest and he tries to stamp on the guy's leg. And they go, fuck no, I'm not leaving that leg there for you. Whereas when you see Lando Venata do it to anyone, he just places his foot above their knee. And it just really annoys them. And what happens is they take a step back and then they try and take a step back in. They don't leap out of the way, and then he's trying to chase them with a wheel kick. So he just puts his foot on McDacey's lead leg twice, and then McDacey decides to circle off towards towards Venata's lead side, and Venata spins and kicks him in the head. The thing about always spinning for shit is that every time you move, the guy's going to assume that you're going to do something crazy, and he'll run. And Alex Caceres retreated from every inkling of an attack from Rodriguez in the later rounds, and nothing connected, basically. Nothing useful, at any rate. There's a reason that everyone will remember for having amazing spinning kicks. Didn't actually throw them that much, because they spent time setting them up. Whereas Caceres has thrown more, in that one fight, he probably spun more than Andy Hug did in his whole career. But Andy Hug actually stopped, numerous people with spinning techniques. What did he have? He had 1 spinning back fist, 1 hug tornado, 2 heel kicks to the face. There's probably a few more in there, but that's a guy famous for knocking people out with spinning kicks and spinning shit. At any rate, Yair will either beat up an old man who can't kick, or Penn will take him down or box him up because he's Rodriguez is a very much a rough diamond. He's not a complete product yet. He's still got a lot of work to do on his boxing and on his ring positioning and things like that. It should be all right. The thing that I'm worried about is if BJ Penn wins, he'll keep coming back. And then he'll fight like a top-level featherweight and get murdered. But I guess that's our topic for next week, if he comes back or not. Anyway, I've been your boy Jack Slack. This is the Fights Gone By podcast. Send your emails to fightsgoneby@gmail.com. Follow us on Facebook so that you can... follow me on Facebook, rather, so that you can join in on the weekly question thread for the quickfire stuff. And I'll catch you next week. Cheers.